Following her death in Avengers Endgame, the folks over at Marvel Studios finally decided to tell a story featuring the Avengers leading lady herself, Black Widow. However, despite the thirst for a Black Widow film among Marvel fans, many people were sadly left with a sour taste in their mouth following the movie. So today, I try to fix the Black Widow movie. Stay tuned. Hey guys, my name is DJ and welcome to What They Should Have Made, a show in which I take a look at a fictional story from the world of movies, video games, what have you, and try to improve upon it with my own ideas. Now, before we get into it, I will say now that I don't fully hate the Black Widow movie. It's a fun, dumb, but ultimately harmless superhero action movie that would be expected to come from Marvel Studios at this point. I like the character dynamics, I love Yelena and Red Guardian, and I even like a lot of the storyline ideas seen throughout the film. No, a lot of the problems that actually come with the Black Widow movie primarily come from everything that's going on outside of the film. When I originally reviewed the Black Widow movie, my big gripe with it was that it didn't really relate to the rest of the MCU in any way. Now, not every MCU movie has to relate to the wider story of the franchise. There are plenty of good Marvel movies, like Iron Man 3 for example, that don't really relate to the wider story of the MCU. But with Black Widow, I just think that this is a movie that needed to address the wider events of the MCU. We as an audience literally just watched the main character of this movie die in Avengers Endgame. Natasha's death was a major part of that film. So to have her movie come out right after her death in Endgame, and to have that death not be addressed at all throughout the duration of the film, it was just really odd and unsatisfying. So when it comes to my rewrite of the movie, which we'll get to in a little bit, I wanted to create a story that accomplishes what they were trying to do in the original movie, while also including Natasha's death as a major story beat. And for me, the important bits of the original Black Widow movie that I had to keep in my version of the story were to introduce Natasha's family into the MCU, more specifically Yelena, to explain more of Natasha's background with the Black Widow project, and to show the audience what the Black Widow project even is, as there's a chance that those girls could come back in the future. And the way I decided to do this was by kind of creating a movie that's centered around this huge conversation between Natasha and Yelena. My movie is essentially a huge conversation taking place in the more modern times of the MCU, spliced in with a lot of background and flashback information, which in turn creates this narrative link between the modern times of the MCU and these big past events that help build out the story and background of both Natasha and Yelena. But I do understand that this time jumping may be a bit confusing to you as a viewer of this video, so I've come up with a solution. When the screen looks like this, then we are in the middle of a flashback scene. And when we are back in the present with the conversation between Natasha and Yelena, the screen goes back to normal like this. And sure, I understand that this may be a bit of a confusing format for this video, but you should be able to understand why I decided to go down this route for our story very soon. But for now, let us finally begin our rewrites of the Black Widow movie. So our story begins with that conversation between Yelena and Natasha. The two women are talking, drinking, and overall having a good time in a remote Russian cabin in the woods. They talk about some of their favorite memories as children before Yelena turns the conversation into one about a game that they used to play as kids. And they reminisce for a moment, saying that the wars that they've gone through since then, well, they're nothing like the wars in that stupid little game. And this leads us into that flashback scene where we see a young Natasha and Yelena playing the board game Stratego, which for those of you who don't know is essentially a capture the flag style game where the two players must command their respective armies as they try to find their flag and they go to war for it. And during this game, we watch as their single dad, Alexei, walks in to watch them play. But even though this version of the story shows the sisters only being raised by their father, everything else about their living situation is pretty much the same from the original movie. They have a relatively nice house in Russia with a happy little family going on. Alexei then decides to use the Stratego board game as a transition to talk about his time in war as the Red Guardian. He talks about how his heroic persona as the Red Guardian would help win Russia many different battles. Sure, he had to do things that he's not necessarily proud of, but if his time in war meant the safety of future generations like his lovely daughters, then it was all worth it. Just then, however, the conversation gets interrupted with a phone call. And when the father picks up the phone, you can see a visible chill going down his spine as he starts to go into a bit of a panic mode. And this leads us, essentially, into the opening scene of the original movie, with Alexei and the two girls being sent into a high-risk chase scene. They quickly pack up and leave their home as the family finds themselves being chased down by a bunch of mysterious cars. But, like in the real movie again, they do end up successfully making it to this remote military plane before flying away. But what comes up must come down as they land safely into the waiting protection of a few Russian soldiers. Just like in the real movie, the family is currently being protected by the Russian military. Or so we think. Because unlike in the original movie, when Alexei decides to turn around to look at his daughters, he is suddenly cracked on the back of his skull. The surrounding soldiers just watch on as this mysterious all-black figure takes off their jacket to reveal a red spider logo on their arm. That is, before quickly and decisively executing him right in front of Natasha and Yelena as they scream out in shock. The female figure coldly points at the little girls, telling the soldiers to throw them in the back of a van as they will become the newest subjects in the Black Widow project. And that leads us into our opening title sequence. That's right, we have a dead dad, traumatized children, and a kidnapping into a horrible and despicable spy project. Welcome to my Black Widow movie, motherfucker. But following that title sequence, we cut back over to Natasha and Yelena as they continue this conversation that this whole story will be themed around. And the conversation has now shifted into one about this big mission that they have been planning for the past few days. And during this conversation, the two women decide to stare over at a picture of the Red Guardian, their dad, as they decide to dedicate this mission to him. And their mission is simple. They look to kill the son of a bitch that murdered their dad right in front of them all those years ago. However, this little glimpse of our conversation doesn't last very long as we lead into another flashback scene. And this time, we're watching as the girls go on a mission together during the year, let's say, 2000. Natasha is about 16 years old here, and Yelena is about 11. And during this mission, their age is actually worked to their advantage as we see them sneaking into a school field trip to a large Russian government office. And during their time there, they manage to sneak away from the field trip, quickly getting through a security-coded door, knocking out a few guards, you know, the whole spy movie thing. Before they end up walking into a filing room to steal, wait for it, some files. Specifically one called The Red Guardian. However, while Yelena tries to walk away, Natasha just stands there with the folder in her hand. But before Natasha can open it, Yelena quickly runs in and tells her no. Okay, they have explicit orders from Mrs. Widow to not open the file. However, after some back and forth, Yelena eventually gives in and wants to see what's in the folder as well, so they decide to open it up. And of course, it describes the Red Guardian, a hero of Russia during World War II. He would fight alongside his soldiers from both Russia and Germany, battling to protect themselves and their values. But he wasn't just a big musclehead. No, it also says that he was a rather smart man, revolutionizing how they would compete against the other nations of the world. He thought that education was the backbone of a good soldier. Of course, at the end of the file is a big group photo that features the man that the two young girls saw murdered right in front of them at such a young age, Alexei Romanoff. And as the two girls are just standing there staring at this file, all up in their emotions, we cut back over to present time. That's right, throughout this story, I might have a lot of those weird cuts between the present and the past. Cuts that perhaps might feel a bit sudden. Essentially, anytime a scene completely fills its purpose for me, I just decide to cut away from it. This is because I kind of like that feeling of mystery that goes along with the Black Widow story. We didn't really know a whole lot about her character leading up to the Black Widow movie, apart from a few pieces of information here or there, and I would kind of like to continue that feeling in her story. The mystery behind her, if you ask me, is kind of one of the best parts of her character. But I don't really have the time to get into all of that right now, so perhaps we could save that for a future video. For now, we've got a story to tell, so let us get back into that conversation between the two sisters. Of course, the two continue planning out their mission, talking about how after tomorrow, their plan to avenge their father's death will finally come to pass. And, well, with that word avenge comes an opportunity for us to dive into Natasha's time as an Avenger. Yelena says that she is just so happy to finally be by her sister's side again in battle. And after seeing what she can do in the Avengers alongside guys like Tony Stark and Steve Rogers, it's gonna be great to see what she's learned since she's been away. And this is a perfect transition, in my opinion, to another flashback scene where we see Natasha and Yelena as sisters chasing after this mysterious archer codenamed Hawkeye. We see them running through the streets with Hawkeye continuously using his trick arrows and his ingenuity to get further and further away from them. Things like shooting an arrow at a falling apart building, causing the roof to cave in, for example. Eventually though, Yelena and Natasha find themselves at a bit of a crossroads, not too sure which direction Hawkeye went in. So they naturally split off into the two separate directions. And after a little while of both women running down their respective paths, Natasha ends up finding herself caught in a sneaky little net trap set up by Hawkeye. And even though she tries to fight out of it, she ultimately finds herself completely stuck when a swarm of S.H.I.E.L.D. agents surround the net. Then, of course, we see Special Agent Nick Fury walk up to the net. Just then, Natasha looks up at a nearby rooftop to see Yelena standing there not too sure what to do. Natasha, however, mouths only one word to her: run. And Yelena listens. She just runs away as Natasha just sits there captured in this net, surrounded by all of these agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Yelena runs away and Natasha protects her sister. And after that heartbreaking flashback, we cut back over to the conversation between Yelena and Natasha. They continue talking about this big plan of theirs, saying that Mrs. Widow put everyone in the Black Widow project through absolute hell. Yelena starts talking about some of the trauma from the Black Widow project before Natasha starts to get kind of emotional. She starts to apologize for just telling Yelena to leave. If Natasha knew that S.H.I.E.L.D. wanted her to work for them as an agent in a safe, loving environment, then she would have instantly told Yelena to come join her. And she only wishes that she could have saved her sooner, which we get to witness right now in our final flashback of the movie. And this one, importantly enough, takes place in 2013, right after Avengers 1, but before the collapse of S.H.I.E.L.D. in Captain America: Winter Soldier. And this flashback is all about a mission created by Natasha. There are two objectives for this mission: save Yelena and put an end to the Black Widow project. We watch as Natasha, Hawkeye, Nick Fury, and a few other S.H.I.E.L.D. agents fly to an island holding the secret Black Widow project. They sneak into this huge facility on the island with an eerie sense that they are being watched from something in the shadows, until they finally end up in a huge hall squaring up against a bunch of the other Widow Project spy ladies. And who steps forward among them? Of course, it's Yelena. Yelena stands there staring at her sister with a tense anger on her face. Natasha says that she's here to save them all from Mrs. Widow, but Yelena interrupts her. Yelena then says, "How dare you? You abandoned me and now you've decided to join our enemy? You decided to join S.H.I.E.L.D. as opposed to coming back to us, to your family, to me." And this breaks out into a huge fight between the two sisters as everybody stands back and watches on. Eventually though, Natasha gets the upper hand and knocks out her sister. Afterwards, however, there is this ominous clap coming from within the crowd of the spies. The woman who steps forward among them is a person that we saw in that group photo from the Red Guardian file, Mrs. Widow. She explains that if they try to leave now, then not only will they not make it out of here alive, but they will also not learn the one secret that Natasha has wanted to know since she was a child. This then leads into a tense stare down between Natasha and Mrs. Widow before a fight ensues once again. They go back and forth with their tremendous athletic abilities being put on display before Mrs. Widow eventually pulls out a gun and points it at Natasha. The SHIELD agents naturally pull out all of their guns and point them all at Mrs. Widow, telling her not to shoot. Mrs. Widow then says, "You think I fear death? Pathetic. Fearing death means you value yourself above all else, and I don't. I value something else, which is why I will let you leave. These girls behind me, these spies, are worth more to me than my own flesh and blood. So you can leave with Yelena. She's already proven her weakness to me anyways." So she lets Natasha go and the SHIELD agents turn to leave before Natasha stops herself. Natasha decides to push one more button, asking Mrs. Widow what this big secret really is. Mrs. Widow chuckles a bit to herself before saying, "You really want to know? Fine. To prove a point. This organization, these girls, are my children, but you and your sister, you're more my children than any of these girls. And then you spat on this family. So no matter what any doctor would say, you two are no longer my children." That's right, the woman that runs the Black Widow Project is Natasha and Yelena's mother. Gasp! Shock! Swerve! And after this reveal, Mrs. Widow just shoots Natasha in the shoulder, as a sign that this woman, their birth mother, simply doesn't value her blood as much as she values her spies. And this transitions us back to the conversation between Natasha and Yelena. Natasha, of course, is just sitting there rubbing her shoulder as the two sit there staring at the board that they have laid out. Yelena then takes Natasha's hand as the two sit there in their familial bond. Their dad is long dead. Their mother, Mrs. Widow, tortured them and turned them into weapons. Ultimately, Yelena and Natasha are each other's only family. And after this little bonding moment, Natasha gets a call. Apparently, Natasha and Captain America have to go check up on Vision in Scotland, which in turn leads us to Infinity War, where they save Vision and Wanda. Of course, this also leads us to the blip where presumably Yelena got snapped away, which of course then leads us to Natasha dying in Endgame to bring everyone back to life, which of course leads to Yelena being unblipped and brought back from the dead. Of course, everything is the same when she comes back because Yelena lives in a hidden little log cabin miles from civilization. So, with this remote location, Yelena kinda just wakes up but has no idea that she was even blipped. So, over the next few days, she has to slowly come to the realization of what has happened through the news. What happened with her being blipped, what happened with Thanos, and, heartbreakingly, what happened with Natasha sacrificing herself for the stone. She has to slowly realize that her sister, her only family left, is dead. And that just eats at her before she takes another look at that board. And that board with their mission all planned out, it just pisses her off. Her sadness then transforms into this determined look the more she looks at the board as she decides to continue on this plan without her sister. But she knows that she can't do this alone. So she picks up the phone and starts dialing. And who does she call? Well, we're just gonna have to find that out in a little bit as we cut ahead to Yelena landing on the secret island housing the Black Widow Project. She lands one last time with nothing to lose and a look of determination in her eyes. Yelena takes her time silently sneaking past the other spies on her way to her mom's office. And after hacking her way in, this is a spy movie after all, she finds herself face to face with the woman who destroyed her life, her mother, Mrs. Widow. Yelena, like the badass that she is, expresses that she's only there for two things: to stop the Black Widow project and to kill her mom. So, the mother-daughter fight commences, and the two start battling in a showcase of acrobatics. This huge climactic fight takes place as Yelena's ready to kill her mom. Both women continue fighting before a bunch of the other Black Widow spies come in to help Mrs. Widow. Eventually, Yelena finds herself being outnumbered, with the spies all attacking her before Mrs. Widow breaks up the assault. Mrs. Widow then gets on top of a physically and perhaps emotionally defeated Yelena with a knife to her throat. But as she speaks, she is interrupted by a small metallic noise on the outside wall. Of course, this noise came from an arrow that was just attached to the wall, and after a beat, we watch as the arrow explodes and the whole wall comes crumbling down. All of the Black Widow spies are taken out as Hawkeye swoops in and goes after Mrs. Widow. And this leads to a 2-on-1 fight, with Hawkeye and Yelena almost recreating the dynamic of Hawkeye and Natasha as they take on Mrs. Widow. And after some back and forth, we watch as Mrs. Widow is able to take down Hawkeye. That is before grabbing a gun from her side and pointing it at an unconscious Hawkeye with one foot planted on his chest, forcing Yelena to stop dead in her tracks. Mrs. Widow then finally gets to say what she wanted to say a few moments ago. Your father was stupid. He was weak, just like this man under my boot. And just like him, he was unable to get back on his feet when everything got tough. He took you two girls and ran when he saw what the Black Widow project had become. To him, he thought it was going to be a military school for children, but he was too stupid to see what they were doing. She then puts the gun down almost in sadness. I loved your father, but the Black Widow project, all of this organization that he himself created, was just not up to the standard of our leaders. So they decided to change it into what it has become today. Your father, he couldn't see what we were trying to do. He decided to put himself and you girls above us, above Hydra. She then takes the gun and points it at Yelena. And just like him, you decided to put yourself above Hydra. So, I'm sorry, but you must. Suddenly, she screams out as Hawkeye has awakened and stabbed her in the leg. Yelena sees this as an opportunity, running in and taking her down. The two start weakly fighting before Yelena gets up to her feet and stands over her mother. Yelena then places a foot on her chest, similar to what she did with Hawkeye, and points a gun at Mrs. Widow. The mom then laughs slightly. You won't do it. You won't kill me. I'm your only family left, because just like your father, you are too weak to pull that trigger. Before Yelena suddenly shoots her in the chest. And with that, Yelena watches as her mom dies right there on the floor. And the Widow spies by this point have all seen what happened. Mrs. Widow is dead. Some of them go to attack Yelena, but the others stop them from doing so. The women then all stare at Yelena with a nod of respect and solitude. Yelena nods in response, assuring them that they will be okay. Hawkeye and Yelena then leave, with the girls all following them to safety. And to close out our movie, just like in the real film, we cut ahead to Yelena standing over her sister's gravestone. But here, the depressing feeling of her loss turns into a feeling of hope. She understands that her sister's sacrifice saved the lives of trillions. And she understands that her sacrifice saved the lives of the people in her new family. She is then joined at the gravestone by Hawkeye. Her new family, her new friends, and her new adventure all lay ahead of her. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how I would have made Black Widow. And, well, there's a ton of reasons why I think the original movie could have done better with the changes I made in this version of the script. But the first question you may have perhaps comes from the post-credits scene where we see Yelena being contracted to kill Hawkeye. And, to be honest, I think you can still have this scene. Hell, my version of the movie probably makes this scene even more compelling. Yelena being told that Hawkeye is responsible for Natasha's death after all of this bonding she's had with him could make their eventual encounter even bigger in the Hawkeye show. The fight just gets that extra added layer to it as she feels as though the one person she could trust betrayed her by killing her sister. And speaking of family, you might be wondering why I decided to change the entire Romanoff family dynamic in my version of the movie. Well, as much as I love David Harbour and his role as Red Guardian in the MCU, I'm gonna be honest, I don't really see much importance for him as a character moving forward. I liked Red Guardian a lot in the real movie, but he just doesn't feel like a character that's necessary in the grander stage of the MCU. And while I know that he's going to be joining Yelena in the upcoming Thunderbolts movie, I still don't think that he's that important of a character. And to be honest, that can be said for the mom character as well. Yelena is the main new person to the MCU from the Romanoff family for me, so scrapping the dad and mom from this movie and completely changing their dynamic just felt easy and inconsequential to the main MCU. So, once I made that decision, it was easy for me to slide the mom into this villain role as the leader of the Black Widow project. But, of course, I did like that familial theme throughout the real movie. So, I came up with this whole idea of having this big conversation between Natasha and Yelena throughout the entire film. And this conversation, I think, is the most vital part to this entire movie, and it really just ties everything together in a neat little bow. Having the whole film framed around this conversation between the sisters, in my opinion, makes the whole movie feel more like it has a purpose for being. My main problem with the real Black Widow movie is that it didn't play with any of the effects that Black Widow's death in Endgame may have had on people she's close to. So to introduce Yelena as Natasha's sister, to see their relationship over the years, and to come to the realization that we are watching Yelena's last conversation with her only family, makes the whole thing feel way more impactful. It creates this connection to the whole story of the MCU, as opposed to making this movie feel very skippable like the original Black Widow movie is. Oh, and as for the little Hydra twist I threw in there at the end, I just think it's a really easy way to kind of explain the Black Widow project in the MCU. After all, Hydra are essentially the Marvel Nazis, and in the real world wars, Germany and Russia were kinda linked together. So the idea of them having a secret facility of Russian spies works as an easy way to, again, tie everything together. And finally, while I love Taskmaster, don't get me wrong, he's freaking amazing, I just don't think that that character really fits in this version of the story. So, just to make things simple, I decided to scrap the character. Taskmaster can appear in the MCU in another way, sure, I think that would be amazing, but I just don't want to force feed this character into this movie if it's not really needed. And that's it. While the original Black Widow movie might not be the worst thing in the world, I feel as though it was a bit out of place. It had a lot to do and kind of a lot of responsibility put on its shoulders, and personally, I just think the movie missed the mark. In this version of events, the Black Widow movie accomplishes exactly what I think was necessary for the MCU. It introduced Natasha's family, including her mainstay sister Yelena. It ties in Natasha's death from Endgame that we as an audience literally just saw. It showed more of Natasha's roots and more of her background as a character while maintaining that mysterious flair that I think is so important for her. And it's an action-packed, emotionally charged battle for the soul of Natasha Romanoff, the Black Widow. Thank you all so much for watching this video. What did you guys think of my version of the Black Widow movie, and hell, what did you guys think of the original Black Widow movie in comparison to mine? And what other stories would you guys like me to tackle in this series? Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and all that good stuff. But until next time, have a good day. Bye-bye.